Hello everyone, it's time for another overdressed deck profile, this time on the Gravidia deck. I held this off from set 3 because set 3 is an introduction set, but set 4 finally gave us the toys that we need to make this deck feel much more playable. Because at set 3, one of the problems with Gravidia is no recycling and pretty much every deck was going to look the same. But now with set 4, with more cards, it finally made the deck feel much more completed and the necessary pieces that we need. Because the very big necessary piece that we need was recycling. And one of the biggest problems with this deck was, in fact, that we had to run a lot of meteors. Because one of the effects of the meteors is that you can run up to 16 copies. And yes, you will need to run a lot to make this deck functional. Because everything heavily relies on the meteor, but without recycling, you kind of had to rely on not losing them. But now with set 4 with recycling, you could start running less, especially with a new meteor that they introduce. But anyway, why I built this deck is because I like the design. I always like the Link Joker aesthetic design, hence why I decided to build Gravidia, because Gravidia has a Link Joker-like design, and I'm always into Link Joker-like aesthetics. And also, she's a space dragon apparently, and not considered alien. I could see some of the dragon bits, but she doesn't really look like a dragon, but hey, I will still take it. Her evolved form as a dragon, even better. So far, how I experienced with this deck, it's pretty fun. Not meant to be one of those top decks, but with the new support, it really helps out a lot with the recycling, and also the way how it functions is basically you have the power to manipulate gravity, hence why you're throwing meteors at your opponent. And that's basically how the deck functions. You just basically set your meteors, which are all set orders by the way, and then just throw them at your opponent. That's basically how you play the deck. And be aware when you're playing this deck, is that when you're starting out in early game, you're probably going to have a tough time guarding because there's way too many valuable pieces, and also your meteors are all 0 shields. So keep that in mind. But in later game, it might not be as much of an issue. But on that, let's begin with the deck profile with, of course, the Ride deck. So my starter for theme-wise, I play Gravidia Dylan, just generic starter, which goes to Gravidia Wells. I am not playing this as a Shadow Army token version of it because I want to stay pure archetype. So Gravidia Wells, when you ride it, you can look at the top 7 cards of your deck and add as many meteor cards as you want. When this deck was first introduced, well, you would be able to easily add like 4 meteors in some cases, but with the less amount of meteors, you're probably going to add average 1 or 2, but still, adding as much meteors is good. But then the second skill is very useful, and I do run multiple copies of this, is that it's an act once per turn. You can Soul Blast 1 if your Vanguard is Nordlinger, your grade 3, and then choose 2 meteors from your hand and set them. And then it gets plus 2k. So the second skill just lets you set more meteors faster, which is why I'm going to run multiple copies of her. And then she goes to Gravidia Beringer. This is only going to be a ride deck card, because rearguard skill is that it gets only plus 5k if you beat the condition, and that's not going to matter because there's better cards. But when you place it on Vanguard or rearguard, you can Soul Blast 3 to draw a card, and this card goes plus 5k. That does actually happen because one of your skills of the meteor is that it does let you soul charge when you place it. So as you can tell, you have 2 soul ready, and you play 1 meteor, which can be searched out by your grade 1. That's 3 soul. You will soul charge a little bit with that, and luckily you have a soul charge engine by default with that, so that's pretty good. And also extra draws really help, by the way. And then finally, to your main boss card itself, Gravidia Nordlinger. For some reason, she's a space dragon, and compared to the other ones being aliens. But anyway, her skill is, when placed on Vanguard, you can counterblast 1 and search your deck for 2 meteors and put them to your order zone. That's pretty good because you speed up your meteor count, and that's what you really want to do. Because the second skill is what everything is built up for. When this card attacks, you can put as many meteorites from your order zone to the drop zone, and then depending on how many you put, these skills activate. So you put at least 1, it gets plus 15k. If you put 3, it gets a crit. If you put 5, your triggers are activated twice. Yeah, so this card has just a lot of pressure on it on its own. Usually you will go for 3, but going 5 isn't bad at all, especially when you could just go double crit on your opponent, especially at a 4 damage situation. Sometimes you will be unlucky that you get no triggers, but on average you should be able to get 1, which to double the trigger is pretty powerful. So overall, this is just a cool boss unit just to annihilate your opponent with, especially with combination with the meteor, which also has another skill when you place it to the drop zone, aka annihilate your opponent. That's basically what it is. This with that can be very powerful altogether. So yeah, I just like the style of it. And now to the main deck itself. First off, I do run the other 3 Nordlingers for personal riding reasons, and also because when she is placed on Vanguard, you get 2 more meteors, so that is always really good on top of that. So yes, of course you have to do the persona riding in this deck. And then before we go to the main lineup, to the most important card of the deck, since you can run up to 16 copies, I run a total of 7 Needless Meteor Showers. So, Needless Meteor Shower is that when it's placed on the Gredora zone, you can soul charge 1. And then, if it was placed by a Vanguard ability, you could also draw a card. You will do the draw sometimes, just be aware of deck out when you do that. But you do have enough recycling and you do go through your deck not too fast enough to make sure of deck out, so it's not much of an issue. And then the other skill is that when it's placed in the drop zone, you retire one of your opponent's rear guards. So with Nordlinger, you use your meteors, put them to the drop zone, and then nuke your opponent's field with them. Yeah, that's a pretty good combination right there. And this is the one that you want to mainly use most of the time because this is the one that will be going to the drop zone. Because you do want to recycle your meteors, and this is the only one that is recyclable right now. Because your next meteor, which is the new one, Fallen Hill Hazard. This one is treated as 2 meteors, by the way. That's one of the skills. But one of the downsides is that, to balance it out obviously, is that when it's sent to the drop zone, you must bind it and then retire one of your opponent's rear guards. So the most important thing is that this counts as 2 meteors, which is why my needless meteor count has been shrunken down. Because originally I was actually playing 15 to balance everything out. But now with recycling, you could run a lot less. And especially this one can count as 2 meteors, which will increase your count for Nordlinger. So one of these with a needless meteor shower is 3. So yeah, why not? But of course, needless meteor shower is the one that you want to mainly use because it goes to the drop zone. But if you have no choice, of course use this as well. And besides, counting as 2 really helps out a lot. And now to the actual units. First off, Gravidia Burrito. So the skill is, when placed, you can Soul Blast 1, choose a meteor from your drop zone, and place it on the order zone. Unfortunately, you will not get to play the meteor ability to Soul Charge 1, but this is fine. You just increase your meteor count, recycle it, and hence why I say that you mainly want to use the Needless Meteor Shower, because that's recyclable, unlike the Grade 2. And then the other skill is that, during your turn, if your opponent's rear guard was retired, this turn discard guess was 5k, if at least 3 were retired, plus 1 crit. Sometimes this won't happen depending against what matchup, but in a good number of matchups, you're going to be able to annihilate your opponent's field, so the more you annihilate, the stronger this card gets. And it's also nice that this is an 18k beater with an extra crit because that adds extra pressure. Because of course, with all the meteors in the deck, you will be lacking in power presence, mainly on the boosting department. So just being able to attack on its own is really helpful, and also just recycling the meteors. And it's much more consistent than the other recycler that I run in this deck. And then, to the Grade 2 lineup. First off, Gravidia Stunner. Because this one, if you have a total of 5 meteors from your order and drop zone, this card gets plus extra 5k power and an extra 5k shield, and it's permanent. So that's really nice. It helps out with some of the defensive issues because, of course, a lot of meteors are all 0 shield, so this will really help out with that department. And being a 15k beater with the lack of booster part is also very helpful. So that's why I run 4 of these. And then for another new card, Gravidia Shurgo. So Shurgo is that once per turn, you can Soul Blast 2 and then choose as many meteor cards from your drop zone and put it back to your deck. And then it gets plus 5k power if you put 1, if you put 3, plus 10, if you put 5, plus 15. So it gets stronger for each meteor that you put. I just run 2 because 1, it's an axe, so you don't need to worry about it too much. The other thing is that you're not going to really activate this too often unless if it's like a really late game. Because once you use most of your meteors, that's when you're really going to actually use this. Other than that, you're not going to really use this really early. But this is overall really good just to help you get some recycling, especially recycling a majority of your grade 1 meteors, which is really good. And it basically lets you play the deck again. I have thought about running a 3rd copy for more just in case measures, but 2 is good enough. As long as you were able to get this to your hand and you just have it ready, you're pretty good. And then to the grade 1 lineup. So like I said before, I also run extra copies of Gravidia Wells. Already explained it in the beginning, no need to explain it even further. Although you could run that new grade 1 where when it's on place, you can kind of also want to put another meteor from your hand to the order zone to draw a card. Since you do run less meteors, it is not too bad to run that. The only problem is that one is on place, So you do kind of have to hold off on it compared to the Wells where it's an axe, so you could use it as a booster. There are ups and downs depending on which one that you want to run. Besides, this deck doesn't have any counterblast issues anyway, so it is not bad to even run that. And Soul is not much of an issue considering that your meteors could literally help you Soul Charge. So you do have that option as well. I just prefer Wells. And finally, your 4 PGs, because you have to run your PGs. And then for the trigger lineup, obviously the over trigger, and doubling the over trigger is insane in this deck. And then of course, 8 crits, because double crit is very powerful. And then I run draws because draw power really does help. Yes, you could stick with fronts in this deck if you're afraid of deck out. But I do prefer draws because draws do give you your key pieces much faster. And I am going to be very honest, I haven't really faced an issue of deck out because I normally annihilate my opponent much faster. And double draw might be better than double front, especially in a deck that can lack rear guard sometimes. And then finally, of course, the 4 heals. So that's it for this deck profile on my Gravidia deck. What other cards would you recommend? Not like there's really much to play right now, but overall I had fun with this deck. This is meant to be a fun deck and I just really love nuking my opponent's rear guards and also a mass power up with crit. And it's a very interesting concept. Yeah, Overdress introduced a lot of interesting concepts, like this one being the Meteor deck, using your Order Zone as mainly your cost instead of using the standard Counterblast or Soul Blast. And this deck didn't really have too much counterblast issues, so there's really no need for countercharging. And Soul is not much of an issue despite all the Soul Blasting because your needless Meteor Shower helps you with the Soul problem. So yeah, resource-wise, this deck doesn't really have much of an issue. And with set 4, this deck got even much better because it really helped with the recycling problem. And overall, this deck is just really fun. Endless Meteor Shower on your opponent, and massive power and crit. And it's even much more fun when you're able to do your double trigger, which can be very powerful sometimes, especially the over trigger, which I have managed few times. And consider that you do filter out your deck quite a bit. Yeah, by the time that you have like a lot of triggers back in your deck, that could be great nasty, especially because you're going to be searching your meteors and getting all that to your hand can be very nasty. And that's going to be a majority of your searching, so it filters out your deck quite a lot. Now, the only thing that I do see a problem with this deck is basically early game advantage. Because the biggest problem is that you do have way too many valuable pieces that you don't really want to throw away. And your lack of field presence can be a problem sometimes due to the amount of meteors that you run. But once you hit your grade 3, everything just starts getting real. But early game it does struggle a little bit based on my experience. But on that, this deck is just overall fun and very powerful. And it's time to say goodbye.